All right. Thanks everyone for hopping on this morning. We're excited to be putting on this webinar in partnership with OCO Global in relation to the Utah UK trade webinar or trade corridor. We've got a wonderful lineup here with Annabelle, Gavin, and Hannah, and they'll introduce themselves individually in a couple minutes when they're doing their presentations. But we just a quick introduction for 47G for those that don't know who we are. We're the trade association for the state of Utah, and we've been around for 2 years now, and we exist to help Utah companies and the aerospace and defense ecosystem to continue to grow. About this webinar came out of so the Governor Cox last year signed an MOU with the United Kingdom. And that MOU established a trade corridor from Utah to the UK. And so our team has been working with OCO Global and Ben McGrath here, and he'll give a little intro himself. But we've been working closely with them to establish partnerships from the UK to Utah to increase trade relations, both importing and exporting. And so that's what this webinar this morning will be focused on. Is about how we can deepen those relationships and how we can establish those trade opportunities in the UK. Just a couple of announcements because those of you on this call are likely interested in international work. 47G will be hosting a business trip trade delegation to Romania, which is a key NATO partner in Europe. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, feel free to reach out to me. But just wanted to quickly plug that since I imagine folks on this call are likely interested in those kinds of topics. With that, I think I'm gonna give a quick intro of Ben and OCO Global. Then I'll turn the time over to Ben, and then we'll proceed with the webinar. A quick intro of OCO Global. OCO Global is a technology-enabled advisory firm focused on trade, investment, and economic development. OCO helps to support clients' expansion and growth into new markets through a global network of offices and partners. OCO works with both public and private clients around the world to deliver value to companies through services such as market research, site selection, and strategy development, amongst many other services. Ben himself has been with OCO Global for over 5 years and is actively involved with supporting companies to realize their potential. Ben works extensively with both US and UK clients, supporting their international growth and helping to develop route to market strategies for customers, including US state trade agencies, industry associations, and private clients across many sectors, with a specialty in aerospace and defense. So with that, thanks again, Ben, Annabelle, Hannah, and Gavin for hopping on this morning. We'll get started with the webinar, and I'll turn the time over to you, Ben.
Thanks very much, Garrett, and thank you all for joining as well, and thank you to our participants on the call. So as Garrett states, I've been working with OCO for 5 years. I'm a consultant, and I have been spearheading the Utah Trade Corridor, which, as Garrett rightly says, has been focused on identifying clusters in the aerospace and defense landscape in both the UK and the US, and creating links through international trade and educational purposes as well. But after the webinar, I'll make sure to drop some of my contact details, and if anyone has any international expansion plans or would need any support getting to the UK or Western Europe, feel free to drop me a message as well. But with that, I'll hand over to Hannah.
And sorry, if I could just jump in here real quick, I forgot to mention, if anyone has questions, feel free to drop in the chat, or there's the Q&A function, and we'll answer them. And then at the end, we'll probably have a more open dialogue for questions. But yeah, feel free to just drop in questions whenever. Sorry to interrupt, Hannah.
No, thanks so much, both. So as Ben mentioned, I'm Hannah Bates. I'm the Sector Director for Defence, Security and Space for North America for the UK's Department for Business and Trade. So I lead our sector team to advise, support and promote British businesses and attract high value investment from the United States and Canada. The Department for Business and Trade is the Department for Economic Growth. We support businesses to invest, grow and export, creating jobs and opportunities across the UK and overseas. Now, as I'm sure you know, The UK and US have a thriving economic relationship, and our economies are highly interconnected. The US is the UK's largest export market, and we are each other's biggest investor. So I've got a little under 10 minutes, I think, to talk about how we help businesses like yours successfully enter the UK and grow your market share. I'll be posting some further information in the chat as we go. I just want to take a moment and provide a bit of context. I want to signpost the new modern industrial strategy, Invest 2035, to be launched in the spring of next year, and the Defence Industrial Strategy, a sector plan that will be part of Invest 2035. Now, there isn't time to delve into detail during this session, but I'm just going to put some links to the Modern Industrial Strategy Green Paper and the Defence Industrial Strategy Statement of Intent in the chat. The Modern Industrial Strategy's goal is to capture a greater share of internationally mobile investment in strategic sectors and spur domestic businesses to boost their investment and scale up their growth. 8 growth-driving sectors have been identified: advanced manufacturing, clean energy industries, creative industries, defence, digital and technologies, financial services, life sciences, and professional and business services. Meanwhile, the strategic aim of the Defence Industrial Strategy is to make sure the imperatives of national security and a high-growth economy are aligned. The Statement of Intent is designed to send an early market signal to business, to see government's direction of travel, take advantage of new opportunities, partner with government, and prepare for change. Industry, academia, international partners, and those outside of defence, particularly those in the tech sector, small and medium-sized businesses, universities, further education, and members of the public, are encouraged to respond to the Statement of Intent either publicly or privately by the 28th of February 2025. And when you get a chance, there is an email address in the Statement of Intent that you can use to do that. I should probably note that the government defence spending supports around 434,000 jobs across the UK, equivalent to 1 in 60 UK jobs, and the majority, 67%, of defence spend with UK industry and commerce goes outside of London and the South East. Okay. So what support can we, including DBT's investment services team in the UK, provide to help you establish and grow your business in the UK? I'm going to summarise the DBT service offer, which is free and confidential, under 4 headings. So informing, assisting, connecting, and supporting. Informing. We'll provide you with the information required to make your decision about investing in the UK. So that might include provision of UK market data, research, innovation and trends data, information on salaries, how to hire, employer information, cost of living and relocation, as well as tax, legal and regulatory information. Assisting. We'll provide practical support to enable you to establish and operate your business in the UK, such as information on grants and incentives, location analysis and site selection, support in obtaining visas and liaising with UK consular and immigration services, site visit support, including scheduling, appointment setting and accompanying, assistance on company registration, setup and structuring. That takes me on to connecting. We'll help you to navigate the market and make connections for your business, including support to connect you and help you navigate UK government, introductions and referrals to service providers who can assist you in your business setup and ongoing operation, introductions to industry leaders, chambers of commerce, universities, and centres of R&D excellence, identification of capital investment and M&A opportunities. Last but not least, supporting. We'll work alongside you and support your growth for the entire lifespan of your business in the UK. For example, business growth support, such as business plan development and connections across industry, publicity and marketing for your investment and your business, a dedicated point of contact to review your progress and facilitate ongoing support, issue resolution, so understanding your challenges and liaising with government and other stakeholders to resolve them. I also want to highlight the UK's new Expand Your Business digital service, a free, simple, do-it-yourself guide with tailored, personalised advice and actionable next steps to help you expand in the UK. It takes 2 minutes to sign up, and I'm just going to post a link in the chat. On the same site, you'll see headings for fine investment opportunities that you can filter by sector and region, and buy from the UK, where you can find UK suppliers that can partner with your business. I've got a few minutes left, so I'd like to end by mentioning UK Export Finance, UKEF, the UK's export credit agency. So UKEF helps exporters access working capital and manage the risk of not getting paid by offering a government guarantee. They partner with private sector finance providers to grow UK exports and international trade. UKEF supports companies of all sizes and sectors across the UK to win export contracts by guaranteeing finance to buyers so they can source from the UK, fulfill more orders by unlocking working capital to take on new or higher value contracts, and get paid for products and services with insurance against buyer defaults. And unsurprisingly, I'm about to put a link in the chat. But thank you, everyone. That's it from me. By no means exhaustive, but I'm going to add some other information that hopefully you'll find useful again into the chat. And with that, I think I'm handing over to Annabelle and Gavin.
Thank you, Hannah. That was really informative. I've learnt loads. Thank you so much for having us today. We're really pleased to be here. Just by way of introduction, I'm Annabelle Thomas. I'm a lawyer and civil litigator at Greenberg Traurig in London. We're a global law firm with 48 offices, one of which I'm delighted to say is in Utah. We have a fantastic team there. And my colleague Gavin is senior associate in our team, and he specialises in particular in white collar business crime, enforcement investigations. And he won't mind me saying that whilst he's in private practice now, he also did a stint with our serious fraud office. So he's seen this from both sides of the coin. So what we're hoping to do is give you a really practical but brief canter through some things you should have in mind, set against the context of the fact that, as Hannah has said, the UK and the US have a thriving economic relationship. It is really important to the UK. You're our number one importer, and I think up to June this year, I think well over £100 billion worth of goods and services came in from the US to the UK. I think you're well over 13% of all of our imports. And there's lots of reasons why the US-UK relationship works particularly well. You know, commonality of language, both have strong and mutually respectful legal systems, which are really important. So for UK export controls and foreign investment, as you all know, the best approach is to get it right from the very start, but that is not always possible. And we all know that life and business throws a number of curveballs. So the aim of this is to set the scene a little, to give you some pointers to consider in what is a very tightly regulated economy, and in particular to give you a heads up about the UK sanctions regime, which does overlap to a considerable degree with the EU sanctions regime, but not perfectly. And it's really easy to inadvertently slip between the cracks, and fixing it is possible, but it's always expensive. So if you can do things properly from the start, that's the best way, making use of all the resources that Hannah has very kindly put in the chat, which all look really helpful. And another thing to remember when you're doing business in Europe is what might be perfectly legal in one European country might be a criminal offence in another. Just by way of example, if you're trying to serve an order in the UK as a foreign lawyer, that's absolutely fine. But if you try to do it in Switzerland, that's a criminal offence there. So let me hand over to Gavin for our next slide, which I think is a UK export overview. Gav, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much to Bruce 7G and Arcade Global for having us. And thank you very much, Hannah, for your comments as well. So UK export controls overview, this will be a canter through the procedures. It relates to the export of goods, software and technology, and can include data, information and technical assistance, which might be subject to so-called strategic export controls. What is an export? The selling of goods and services overseas, very broadly. And the UK, in relation to controlling that, has put in place a system of rules and regulations, included as well as tax and various duty rates, and requirement to complete various export documents prior to any export of any good software or technology or any other sort of information technical assistance. These obligations and requirements sort of vary across the broad range of product from the UK, and include simple things like knowing what your product is made of. By way of example, if you're sort of exporting chocolate, say, you'll need to know that it contains, if it contains sort of cereal, fruits or nuts, and this will impact on the license or the nature of the approval that is required for it. These exports are controlled for a vast range of reasons, including internal sort of concerns about internal repression, regional instability, concerns about the development of weapons of mass destruction, foreign policy issues and international treaty commitments, and the protection of national and collective security of both the UK and its allies. A failure to comply, importantly, with export controls can result in significant civil financial penalties or even criminal offending. So something to be heightened and to be aware of. The UK process, unlike the US, which has sort of two broad streams under ITAR, so the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, which deals with defence articles and services, and the EAR, which is Export Administration Regulations, which deals with commercial and dual use items. The UK, specifically the Department for Business and Trade, maintains a single list of all items subject to strategic export controls. This is the Export Consolidated List of Strategic Military and Dual Use Items. And these require export authorization. So the two main categories are military goods, software, technology specifically designed or modified for military use, or dual use items, which are goods, software and technology that can be used for both a civilian or commercial or military purpose. So an example might be where you manufacture or produce something like a ball bearing or ball bearings. This product may well be controlled as a dual use item, as the ball bearing could be considered as technology which could be repurposed to make ballistic missiles. So the sort of process is apply a degree of caution and review the list. In addition to sort of the consolidated list, there's also trade sanctions, which are managed via the FCDO, so Hannah's neck of the woods, I guess, and DBT, the Department for Business and Trade. And as mentioned, the UK uses sanctions to fulfill a range of purposes, including supporting foreign policy objectives. So the sanctions measures affecting trade include arms embargoes and prohibitions, say, on the provision of certain services. In the UK, the Department for Business and Trade's Export Control Unit is responsible for trade sanctions licensing. And we also have now the recently established Office of Trade Sanctions Implementation, OTSI, which deals with specific trade prohibitions, such as the prohibition on the provision of certain professional services. There's about 9 or 10 that have been identified explicitly, including legal advisory services, business and management consulting services, and accounting. So you need to ensure that you're aware of these restrictions, as the penalties for failing to comply can be significant. Not too recent example, but one that is sort of financially significant, is back in February 2022. HMRC, so His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, imposed, which is responsible for enforcement of export violations on behalf of various authorities I've mentioned. And HMRC fined an unidentified UK company by way of a compound penalty in the region of £2.7 million relating to the export of unlicensed military goods. So it can have significant impacts on business, as well as sort of the reputational damage to a degree. So if you have an item that falls within the consolidated list, there's a detailed application process. And it is the exporter's responsibility to check whether items require an export license, and if so, the application should be made well in advance of the proposed shipment date to avoid issues, for example, customs problems that can crop up. There are various options available, and that includes manually checking the consolidated list, or potentially more slightly easier is making use of DVC's Open General Export License and Goods Checker tool, which is genuinely a decent and reliable source, and it provides helpful guidance, including the terms and conditions to be met before registering for an online export license via the online export licensing system. Without wanting to get into the weeds of all this, a license is required. If a license is required, then you must have available various matters such as an economic operator's registration and identification number. You need an export control classification number. You need to ensure that you have all supporting technical documents that support the classification that you're seeking, as well as details relating to the site from where you'll be exporting the goods. For example, is it Great Britain or Northern Ireland? There's a difference, so be careful. And then, of course, amongst others, confirmation of the ultimate end user, which can expose an exporter to other sort of risks around, various other failures. There are a number of, at least 3 different licenses. There's the Open General Export License, which is a reusable license for exporters regularly sending military or dual use items overseas. There's an Open Individual Export License, which enables multiple shipments of specific controlled goods to named destinations. The OIEL comes with various restrictions, such as it's valid for 3 to 5 years. It needs sort of details around dealer to dealer details, and it covers a whole range of other sort of export forms. And then there's the standard individual export license, which covers a single or multiple shipments of specific goods to a named destination, which tends to be valid for about 2 years. And it must be specific around the quantities and the values of the items for export. So that's it from the sort of overview. Appreciate there's a lot in there. Moving on to exceptions for UK companies. Now I'm not sure if everyone on attendance in this matter, in this webinar, we're also in attendance at the previous one hosted by one of our colleagues from the US, which focused on US issues. But also mentioned during that was the UK, US and Australia security partnership, which was established in 2021. This has brought about the sweeping away of significant export controls that will significantly reduce bureaucratic burdens and risk for companies. From a UK perspective, the most significant steps are those to remove and reduce US export licensing requirements. On US controlled goods and technology sent to the UK and transferred within the UK. Hannah's just very helpfully posted a link to some of those issues around AUKUS. without wanting to repeat what was presented previously, it's important to note that on the 19th of April of this year, almost all controls on EAR items were lifted for the UK and Australia. And these changes are estimated to eliminate some 1,800 license applications a year for goods worth about $7.5 billion. So quite significant, $7.5 billion. So quite significant changes as a result. In the UK, steps are being taken, but they are less radical, due in the main to the existence of the open general license available. And that covers most of the dual-use military items that are already sort of exported between the US, Australia, and the UK. To complement these, there are proposals in place for an OGL number 2, which will cover the equivalent range of dual-use military goods and technology exempted by the US and Australia already. So it's something to keep an eye on. And it seems to be successful and aids the speed with which our respective jurisdictions can engage in business activities. As I mentioned at the bottom of the slide, other countries may well join this group in the future. There's been reference in the press around Japan potentially joining, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. And then our final slide, which there we go, matters to be aware of. So for any business that's wanting to do business in the UK, there are a huge number of resources that are helpful to stop you inadvertently getting into trouble. One of our most important organisations here is Companies House. And that is the entity that basically makes sure companies are registered properly and all the information is where it needs to be, and that's where your accounts will get uploaded, etc. Now, Companies House has, as of this year, 2024, been given a new range of powers. So they've got more powers to query information and ask you for evidence. They're doing more checks on companies' names. They've got new rules on companies' addresses. It can't just be a post office, PO box anymore. You have to have a registered email address as well. There's also now requirements to confirm that you're forming a company for lawful purposes, and they've got much greater powers to challenge companies about whether they've complied. And failure to comply on some things are a criminal offence, others are a civil offence. So it's incredibly important to make sure that you've crossed that off properly. There's some resources which I think are fantastic, which I'm going to take a leaf out of Hannah's book and pop these in the chat. Here we go. So the first one is a guide to how to register a file and disclose your information with Companies House. Really important to get all of that right. Then the next one I'm putting up is one of my personal favorites, which is the proof system, which I think is absolutely excellent. Basically, if you set up a UK company, you want to make sure that no one can file stuff, put forms in inaccurate, or anything that's basically will cost you a lot of time and money to fix. So the proof system, I think, is excellent. If you're setting up a UK company, A, follow the guidance about how to do it properly, and it's all really practical and really sensible. And B, use the proof system to make sure that you are protecting yourselves from bad actors causing you trouble. On the email address point that you have to put up, it is going to be really important that that is monitored. We often have clients who come to us because they've suddenly found they've been served with a default judgment from the UK courts. They are very difficult to overturn. There are limited circumstances in which you can do so, and quite often the problem can have been avoided if the email address that you have to give to Companies House is monitored properly. The other thing to have in mind is that under the Companies Act, Section 1140, which is one of my absolute favourite sections, is that a company director can be served with legal proceedings at the address they've given to Companies House, even if those legal proceedings have got nothing to do with the company. So have a think about what addresses you put down for your directors. Any address that's there is going to need to be monitored. Have a think about whether it should be an address within the jurisdiction. Make sure the persons of significant control register is kept up to date. All of this is in the guidance that I've put in the chat. But if there's any queries about any of it and what it means in practice, then we are available. And they run a number of free webinars and seminars for companies that are wanting to set up a branch office in the UK, basically about how to get your house in order to make sure that you are protected. The other thing, oh no, Gavin is going to take this next point, so I will leave him to it. Gavin, floor is yours.
I know. Thank you, Annabelle. Yes, so very briefly, other matters to be aware of in the UK. Number of pieces of legislation have been introduced over the last 14, 15 years that impose significant responsibilities and risk from a liability perspective on corporates, organizations and entities and everything that sort of comes within that realm. And I've highlighted here, we've highlighted here failure to prevent offences as being areas to be particularly aware of, much like the US FCPA obligations that expose corporates to criminal liability, the UK Bribery Act, the UK Crime and Finances Act that introduces a failure to prevent tax evasion, and most recently the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, which introduces a failure to prevent fraud. It is wide-ranging in terms of its jurisdictional scope, and it is effectively strict liability. So if a member of the organisation carries out one or other of these potential offences, that exposes the corporate to criminal liability, subject to having in place, as we've set out here in the slide, effective, assessed, adequate or reasonable policies and procedures, which might not result in preventing the committal of a crime by someone who works in the organisation, but will mitigate that, and that will be taken into account when assessing whether or not a corporate should be held liable for the fallout that results from this level of misconduct. We've set out here, and I wouldn't want to sort of dwell on it too much, but there's other risks as well, and just highlighting money laundering, which is a significant concern internationally, and is something that the UK government has taken significant steps to restrict. Annabelle mentioned Companies House. That is one of the sort of key factors in avoiding or mitigating UK sort of exposure to money laundering, and tightening up the procedures in place to register a company, and ensuring that ultimate beneficial owners are all identified and things like that. Financial sanctions, of course, something that we're all very much aware of today, following Russia's actions in Ukraine, which is sort of upped the ante around the enforcement of sanctions and their scope. And then, of course, the trade sanctions and various other restrictions that are in place, something to be very much appreciative of. Finally, the National Security and Investments Act. It's a big piece of legislation, hasn't resulted in a huge amount of significant interest, but there have been, it has been active since it's come into force in January 2022. It significantly expanded the types of transactions covered by national security reviews. A number have been forced to divest their interests in these companies that have been acquired. Interestingly, focus has been on Chinese businesses looking to acquire UK interests. This is probably a whole sort of seminar in itself, but of note is that a couple of weeks ago, the first ever judgment on the UK government's application of the National Security and Investments Act was handed down, whereby the High Court upheld the government's decision to acquire, in this instance, an organisation called Letter One Group, which is ultimately owned by Russian nationals, including a number of individuals subject to UK sanctions. And that decision was to divest the entirety of its shareholding in a fibre broadband startup called Up. Of note from that judgment, it sets out a high degree of deference that the court will afford to the UK government in its NSIA reviews, and sets a high bar for parties subject to remedies orders seeking to overturn them. Notably, the High Court did grant judicial did grant Leicester One the opportunity to JR its decision. And so we watch this space to see how that goes. But I'm sorry, JR mean judicially review. So they've got they might well appeal against that. So we'll see what happens. It identifies issues of procedural fairness and oversight. So something to be aware of. But again, something like to watch this space on.
And can I just jump in to say on the OFSI sanctions enforcement front, to date, there's been 10 enforcement actions and 1 criminal charge, but we're expecting, obviously, as it's got bigger over the last year to 18 months, and we expect them to become more active. But I think that's it from us.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Annabelle, Gavin, Hannah. Thank you so much. We'll now open the floor for questions for a couple of minutes. Feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. If you raise your hand, I can allow you to talk, and then you can ask your question. While people are stewing on those questions, I think one question that would be helpful for us just to generally understand, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, Gavin, but how have world events affected the UK in terms of defense spending? So when I say world events, I'm talking specifically Russia invasions of Ukraine and China's, China being China in a lot of ways. And so how have those things affected attitudes in the UK, if at all? And it's a question for everyone, not necessarily just Gavin, but
Gavin, you're on mute. But before you respond, I was going to leap in to say, this week in the UK, a defence minister has come out as saying, if the British Army were forced to fight a war on the scale of the Ukraine conflict, it would be wiped out within 6 months. So defence is very much high on the agenda at the moment in the UK. But Gavin, I interrupted you, but I'm going to say something else.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's very much a significant concern. And it is at the top of, to steal Annabelle's terms, it's on the top of most organizations' agendas. There have been recent discussions around national security of the United Kingdom. I'd recommend it. There's a very useful RUSI sort of conversation webinar that was posted a couple of days ago about the UK's approach to its security position. And bearing in mind, like just taking financial sanctions as an example, there hasn't been the extent of the financial sanctions regime in the UK is unprecedented. And so something very much to bear in mind, should issues develop around China, which will be a fairly different scenario given China's position as a sort of global superpower, and its well-established countermeasures that already exist.
I think there's a question in the chat that's just cropped up.
Yeah, I'll read it just for recording purposes, but can you speak to forming a joint venture with a long-standing UK company?
I can take the kind of practicalities of this. As a litigator, we quite often deal with disputes where the JV agreement has not covered all that it needs to. So I would say JV agreements are regularly litigated in the UK High Court. So it is really important to think about the jurisdiction clause, the dispute resolution clause, the deadlock provisions are really important because that's often where these things fall down. So getting that structure correct from the start and understanding the rights and obligations, whether it's a contract of good faith, all those kind of points are really important. I'm sure Hannah and Gavin will have other points to make on this. Or not.
I don't. I'm looking at Gavin.
Yeah, right. I don't either. Other than I would say within GT, Green Triangle, we have expertise that will undoubtedly be able to assist with those sorts of inquiries, for sure.
One other question I have, and if we don't have any other questions after that, I think we can end. But on a related note, when we're thinking about UK's prioritization of defense. What are in all of your opinions, what are some key opportunities or key technologies that the UK is particularly interested in, that maybe our companies could take advantage of? For example, Ukraine is showing how important drones are, and so drones are a big thing going on. But as far as other priorities in the UK from a defense perspective, what are your thoughts there?
I suspect this might be one for Hannah. Gavin, you're accidentally screen sharing your inbox. Thank you. This might be one for Hannah, I think.
You're muted.
I'm on mute.
There you go.
I'm on mute. So I think I'm going to talk about it a little broader, if that's okay, Garrett, because I think one of the things I actually do really want to highlight is the importance here of kind of wider participation from the tech sector, from SMEs, in the defence supply chain. So the role of non-traditional defence suppliers, and that's also from, you know, making sure that we can innovate at the pace of the threat, you know, stay ahead and seize opportunities for global leadership in that space. I think, you know, you've mentioned drone technology, for example, but I think we're very much looking at that, you know, seizing the future is one of the things that really stands out to me, for example, from the Defence Industrial Strategy Statement of Intent, and that's around, you know, the pace of procurement, you know, defence research, innovation, you know, the acquisition of new, clean and emerging technology, and very much looking at a more diverse community of suppliers, you know, to exploit mature civil technology and data in innovative ways. So driving spillovers from dual-use technologies back into the civil sector as well, and making sure that we're rapidly pulling through early stage technologies. So probably a bit broader than specific things, but hopefully that's a helpful steer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you to everyone for joining today. Thank you, Ben, Annabelle, Gavin, and Hannah, for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. I will be sending out the recording, as well as Gavin, if it's okay, if I can send out the slides as well. We can send those to those on the call. But feel free to reach out with any questions. Happy to connect you to any of these folks. Greenberg Traurig is a key partner of 47Gs locally, and so very excited that Annabelle and Gavin were able to hop on this morning. And then thank you again, Hannah. Good to see you again, and Ben, thank you for your help on this. So with that, I think we'll end it, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks,
Very much.
everyone.
Thanks, folks.